Welcome to AutoCAD 2015. If you haven't done so already, you can go to AutoCAD's educational community, and with your EDU email address, you can actually download a free copy of the educational version or the student version of 2015. We'll get into the differences of that versus a full-blown version in class, especially when we start to print. But you'll be able to download a free copy there, and you can use it throughout the whole semester. When you open that up, once you install it, once you download it, this is what you're going to see with AutoCAD. So this is AutoCAD, the program, and now what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the interface of it. So the interface in AutoCAD consists of what essentially is the application button. Okay, it's this little graphic that looks like an A up at the top. If I expand that, you'll see that there's a lot of, the tools that you can find, generally with other programs. You can open up a new file, you can open up a drawing or an existing drawing or other drawings. You can save, do a save as, export, so on and so forth. There, underneath it, are what are called the command ribbons. Okay, and this is essentially where the tools of AutoCAD live. You'll see that they're grouped, into certain areas, underneath, the draw tools, the modify tools, the annotation tools, so on and so forth. So what AutoCAD or Autodesk did in developing AutoCAD is they essentially said, okay, these are going to be the common tools when you do a drawing task. This, for the modifying tasks, these are the common tools for that. Adding annotations, layers, so on and so forth. We're going to be going through the commands in here pretty thoroughly. But just to, give you a heads up, AutoCAD has tons of commands, So it really is just about exploring the program and getting to know it in order to experience, the commands beyond what is actually listed here. And as I said, we'll go through it with the, for the remainder of the semester. So we're going to start off, doing little bits and pieces. This area here, is your model space. And this is basically our drafting area and where we're going to be drafting everything. Yes, there is paper space, and we'll talk about paper space in a little bit, in subsequent classes. But right now, for this week and, possibly next week, we're going to be staying, in model space, and that's it. The command window is down at the bottom, and you can expand it and contract it. And essentially what this does is it keeps a track of the commands and all of the actions that we've done during our time, in the open AutoCAD. So that usually sits right at the bottom. And then there's also the status bar down below. And this essentially tells you your drawing coordinates, and it also has additional tools that we'll also review in moving forward with AutoCAD. Up at the top, there's also the quick access menu. So, it has the same commands, basically as the application menu, but they're a lot quicker to access. All you have to do is click on it rather than opening it and then, opening the application menu and then having to select from there. So they've created a little bit of a shortcut, saving you a few steps. So continue. The command ribbons, so we'll focus on that for a second. The command ribbons contain the tool buttons for the commands. And to access the different groups of commands, we can switch our workspace setting, to essentially change the tools up here. So what that means is that down in the lower right-ish, there's essentially this gear. If I expand that gear, you'll see that there's a list of essentially what's our workspace settings. Right now, what is selected is drafting and annotation, and what that does is it makes the tools appear for drafting and annotation if that's our task. Once we start to work in 3D, and we'll do that towards the end of the semester, we can change this, and we will change it to get the tools for that. Now, what happens is that it doesn't change when you can access a command. I can still be in drafting and annotation, and I can still type in a 3D command, and it's fine. All it does is say, if you're drafting an annotation, if that's the task that you're going to be doing, then these, are most likely the tools that you're going to be using. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make them easily accessible for you up here. Okay, and as I said, if you choose to do 3D commands while you're doing a drafting and annotation, okay, or while you're drafting and annotating, you can still do the same. You can just type in the command, and that's fine. Okay, or what I can do is I can say, okay, I might want to switch to a little 3D work for a little bit. I'm going to click on the 3D basics. Okay, and so what that does is it calls up the tools that I'll be using for that. Okay, and again, if I have any objects, anything in model space, it's not going to affect that at all. Okay, all it does is it's just a display. Okay, it displays those tools for that task up above. So I'm going to change this back to drafting and annotation because that's what we're going to be starting with when we start to work with AutoCAD. So essentially, this is a ribbon system that Autodesk has introduced in starting with release 2009. Okay, so it's relatively recent, but pretty much in the profession everything's caught up to this point. So you really shouldn't, and I'm not going to say you shouldn't. You might see an older version pre-2009 that does look a little bit different. Okay, it doesn't act different. The commands are still the same. Okay, basically what they've done is they've gone from a classic view, which is rather than the ribbon system, they have a series of tool buttons. Okay, and little toolboxes above that you can click on the icon for the tool that you're going to use. And what they've done now is with the more recent versions, okay, starting in 2009, is they've introduced this ribbon system. Okay, you'll find that actually other programs, such as the Microsoft programs, all of those have also done this. So this should not be an unfamiliar format when you start to work with programs, either AutoCAD or other than AutoCAD. And what this system does is essentially groups these tools together. So for example, this draw menu, okay, is essentially the tools that they've consolidated for our drawing task. Now you'll notice that each of these, okay, we have draw, modify, annotation layers, so on and so forth. We're going to be exploring these. Each of these has a little arrow, okay, a little triangle that's essentially pointing down. And what that means is that whenever you see that, that's AutoCAD's language for you can expand it and there's more below. So I can click on that and you'll see that there are additional commands, okay, located here. These are probably the less popular ones, okay, so they tend to make them more popular up at the at the forefront, so that really rarely do you have to expand this, but there are some times when you need to. Okay, and you'll see that when I do that, I can click and expand it, and then it'll pop back up. There might be times when I just want to what's called pin it to the essentially to to the space beyond. What that does is it essentially keeps it open until I unpin it. And to do that, okay, if I am working with something down here and I don't want it to keep popping back up, what I can do is I can expand this, and there's a little pin in the lower left hand corner that I can click on that and pin it to essentially the space, and it won't pop back up. Okay, if I'm done using these tools, okay, in this area here, and I do want it to pop back up, I can just click on that pin again and it'll bounce right back up. Now with these with the expansion of it, okay, you also get the expansion of certain tools as well. So for example, we have a line, a polyline, but then when we come to the circle, okay, you'll see that there's also a little arrow indicating it can be expanded to as well. So when we start to draft and we start to get into the options of the tools, you'll find that there might be additional ways of actually creating something. So for example, with this circle, to start off with as the default is to specify the center of the circle and then indicate the radius. However, there might be times when you need to indicate the diameter Okay, so another option is to select, indicating the radius, or the center first, and then your next step will be indicating the diameter of it. You might need to snap to 2 points, you might need to snap to 3 points, and if you really want to get crazy, you can get into the tan radius or the tan, if you recall, your high school geometry years. I don't, from way long ago, so I rarely, if ever, if never, use this. So there are, in addition to just creating a circle, there are different ways of creating a circle, and AutoCAD has taken that into account, and it gives you those extra options. So you'll find that with specific tools, they will have that arrow indicating that they're, for example, in this case, under trim and extend, this is actually a different command, okay, other than trim, which is on top. But if you have, for example, the arc, okay, these are different ways that you can actually create that arc. So it has the two with it, and it allows you, different ways of getting the result that you want, okay. With, drafting in AutoCAD, there's really no set perfect way of doing something. It's not like you have to do it one way. There are ways of doing things more accurately, okay, and we'll look into that when we start to actually draft up the space. But really, when you start to work with AutoCAD, you'll learn to, throughout the course, how commands differ from each other, okay. So for example, skipping ahead, line and polyline will act the same and they'll look the same, but they are different, and you'll see the differences between the tools, okay. It's not to be redundant, but you'll see that when we start to add some modifiers, that it will start to act differently, and that's the reason why they have so many tools and commands. AutoCAD has hundreds of commands, but essentially, if it looks okay in the end, then it's fine, and if it's accurate, that's what's important when we start to draft with AutoCAD. Now, in drafting, okay, a lot of times what happens is that you're working on a smaller screen, okay. You could be working on a laptop. Some laptops have really, really small screens. Some have, nice, big, wide screens. But essentially, they've also designed, this program to make your model space as big as possible, okay. You'll find that when you start to draft, the preference is to have as big of a model space as possible. And what AutoCAD does is it's the way the tools are, it's made the palettes, okay, when we get into palettes, they've made them flexible enough so that we can actually make this model space as big as before, or as big as it can be. So to do that, okay, as we've seen before, okay, with the command line, is we can expand it just by clicking and dragging on the top edge, or we can minimize it by clicking and dragging it. We can also get rid of it, okay, and this is where our dynamic input comes in handy. If you've noticed, well, we haven't started typing in a command yet, but if I do, just let's say type in C, okay, you'll see that there's actually the command line right by the cursor, and that's indicated by this dynamic input and having it on. If you don't like that, and it's a preference thing, then what you can do is you can just use your command line. I always suggest that, especially for beginners, it's nice to have the command line, to begin with and expanded to begin with, so that you can see how AutoCAD's essentially talking back to you, okay? AutoCAD is a very logical program. It is, very easy. I think it's very easy to use in that it uses the same language, and it stays with that language, and it stays with that process. So in learning new tools that might not, be like each other, okay, it's still pretty easy to figure out because it keeps with a certain language, and it essentially talks back to you. And so you'll see that it's looking for commands, and in some instances, we'll see a little bit later, is that it will ask for more input, okay, and it essentially talks back to you. So it's helpful to have this so that you can see AutoCAD talking back to you. You're going to see the more information it might need. But you can also, as I said, you can get rid of it by closing it. Okay, you'll see that when it comes up, that if you do want to get it back, that you just press Control+9. And if you just want to use an abbreviated version, and we'll show this as we go through, there's the dynamic input. Okay, and again, it's really just to expand the model space and make it as big as possible. What you can also do is you can actually minimize these ribbons too as well. So if you find that you're working on a really, really small screen and these ribbons are taking up a lot of space, there's this little tiny button, okay, right above there, that allows you to minimize, the ribbon and the panel buttons. So if I click on that, it'll, get a little bit shorter. If I click on it again, it'll get even shorter. Okay, it's only words. And then if I click on it again, it'll actually disappear altogether. Okay, if that happens, you'll see that the arrow that was pointing up now points down, and I can click on that again, and now I can show all the full ribbons again. Okay, and you'll also see that when I do mouse over these tools, AutoCAD also gives me a little bit of a description about what this tool might do, and then if my mouse stays on there for a while, okay, then it gives a more detailed description. So it's very helpful in getting to know it. It does talk back to you. It does it does give you some insight into what the tools do, and so it's made itself to be a fairly easy program to pick up on. Okay, so in this area, as an aside, you can also change the tools here. Okay, you can go into what's called the CUIs, or the custom user interface. A lot of people, when they start to work with AutoCAD, this is all personal preference on how they want to work. Some people, work differently than others. That's fine. It's a matter of preference. What tool snaps they want on, how they want the ribbon to show. There's, again, nothing right or wrong about it. It's just getting what, needs to be done in the end, getting that done and accurate. So, you can customize it. We're not going to get into that in this course, but it is, available to be done. So as I said, the center of the screen, this is model space, and that's where we're going to be doing all of our drafting. If you've talked to people about AutoCAD, you'll understand that you may have heard the term paper space. Okay, so there is a paper space too as well. If we go down to these tabs in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see that there's a model and there's a layout and a layout. The first layout, if we click on that, this is paper space, and we'll be setting up our drawings in paper space later on. But for now, we're just going to be staying with model space. So I'm going to click back onto model space. Keep in mind that with any file, there's only one model space, only one space that you can draft in, but you can have multiple layouts. And again, we'll talk about this more when we get into paper space, but just remember that you can only have one model space, period. Okay, up at the upper left, you can see that there are also some additional tabs, and these are essentially the drawings that are open during this session. So you can actually have multiple AutoCAD drawings open at the same time. The first one just indicates that this is basically the start screen. So AutoCAD will automatically open up with a file. And that's what happened with us, is that it automatically opened up to drawing 1. And that's AutoCAD's way of naming your drawings when you open them up. Drawing 1, drawing 2, drawing 3, until you actually give it a name. The new tab is just, this is the starter screen if it doesn't open up with a file. But the default is for AutoCAD to automatically open up a drawing, and you can start to work with it like that. So these are the drawings that are open currently. Now at the bottom of the program window, you'll notice that there's a status bar with several buttons. So the first area that we see kind of in the middle-ish is these are your drawing coordinates. So basically what happens is when I move my mouse, you'll see that it moves. Okay, so that kind of keeps track of where your mouse is, you know, as you know, a level of information. Here you have model or paper space. You know, again, we're just going to stay with model space, but you'll see that when we flip to paper space, okay, that says paper. So it gives us this extra, you know, kind of little note telling us what kind of space that we're in. So if this says model, we know that we're in model space, and it's all good. These here are your drafting settings, okay? And this is where you can start to personalize how you want to start to draft in AutoCAD. You can have it with a grid, okay? You can turn the grid off, so if I click on that, okay, you'll see that the grid disappears. There's nothing wrong with it. Again, it's a matter of preference. There's a snap mode. Just keep in mind that this snaps to a preset grid in AutoCAD, so you'll find that when you start to work with this snap, and if you start to do things, okay, that it might get really jerky. Okay, the mouse might get really jerky, and so just make sure that your snap mode is off if you want a smooth mouse movement, and if you don't want to snap to a grid. I typically don't use a snap or a grid really at all. So to turn that on and off, all I have to do is click on them, and if they're on, okay, they're going to be blue, and you'll note that when I mouse over it, it also says the same thing. If it's gray, okay, then it's off, and again, it'll tell you when I mouse over it. So again, you know, play with these because they're going to start to be really, really helpful when you start to draft, and they're going to start to make your drawing more accurate, and that's what we want. That's the goal when we draft, is that we want our drawings to be as accurate as possible. So again, you know, play around with them, get to know which ones you like the most. Again, it's, you know, it's a personal thing, but these are really helpful in getting you accurate drawings. And then to navigator space, okay, there is what's called this view cube, or the WCS, up in the upper right hand corner, okay, of our model space. And what this does is it gives us an orientation of, you know, essentially what's north, south, east, and west. In the older versions, it used to just have, you know, the X and the Y axis, as you can see here, okay? But now really a lot of people are turning to this to try to get more of an orientation. You know, they've taken the X and the Y, and now they've turned it into north, south, east, and west. And when we start to get into 3D modeling, you know, we can do sun mapping according to these coordinates, according to this compass, and all of that when we start to work with 3D modeling. But for now, try not to you know, click on this or mess with this too much, okay? Because what we want to do to begin with is we're going to start with two-dimensional drafting. If we start to mess with this, it's going to skew, okay, our model space into a 3D mode. And even though it doesn't affect our two-dimensional drafting theoretically, it's going to skew the way that you see it, okay? And it's going to get confusing, and it's going to kind of screw you up a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with it as it is, so don't touch this. In fact, I prefer, you know, students to actually get rid of it, but I won't do that for this session. Just, you know, resist the temptation to start to click on this guy, because what we're going to start to do is we're going to start to work with 2D flattened space, okay, essentially a top view of our model space. And then once we get to be more comfortable with that and get into 3D, then we will start to work with this more. But until then, as I said, you can just leave it be. And so that is really the basics of the interface, you know, with AutoCAD. We do have this palette that pops up. We can get rid of that because we're not going to be using that. And this is the space that we're going to start to work in.